If I'd known tonight would end with me stuck in a car full of people I'd rather have left stranded in the middle of nowhere, I should have just set Taylor's engine on fire instead of bothering to fix it. I hate humans, always have. Tonight just served as another stark reminder of why. The fake smiles and hollow laughter coming from the restaurant, all of it grated on my nerves like fingernails scraping against a chalkboard. What made it even worse was how they talked about Penny as if she weren't even there, completely oblivious to her presence. It felt personal, almost as if they were targeting me directly. And then there's Taylor, he's no longer the brother I remember. 16-year-old Taylor used to be reckless, yes, but at least he still cared about how others felt and looked up to me. But now this Taylor, sitting in the backseat grinning and texting away as if his only burden in life were his phone, it makes him feel utterly foreign to me. Bold, outgoing and charming, yet tinged with a carelessness that I inwardly despise. As for Penny, when the light turned red, I couldn't help turning my head to glance at her. She was asleep, slumped against the car window, her head resting lightly on the cool glass, her lips slightly parted. One hand hung loosely on her thigh while the other lay awkwardly curled up by her side. She looked utterly disheveled, not just tired, but utterly drained. A kind of exhaustion that ran deep into her bones, one that even sleep couldn't begin to heal. Streetlights cast mottled shadows across her face, outlining the gentle curve of her nose, the faint freckles on her cheeks, and the soft lower lip that parted ever so slightly with each breath. Her hair was a mess, a few strands dangling in front of her face, clinging to the corners of her mouth with every tiny exhalation. Somewhere deep inside me, a weight suddenly sank, a heavy, sharp weight. All it would take was reaching out to touch her, so easily. Bold, I brushed the stray strands of hair from her forehead. My fingertips traced along the curve of her jawline. I touched that soft, fragile beauty, just to make sure it wasn't all a mere illusion. The green light turned on. I jerked my gaze back to the road, clenching both hands tightly around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. In the backseat, Taylor broke the silence. "Hey," he said, his tone light and cheerful, "thanks, man, another one saved." I mumbled something in response, a vague grunt that passed for, "You're welcome," though deep down, it felt like a lie. Taylor leaned forward between the seats, still texting with one hand, grinning as if he'd just had the best night of his life. "By the way," he said, "what do you think of those friends of mine?" I snorted softly. "Okay, I guess." It was brief, flat, and I hoped he'd take the hint. But he didn't. "Come on," he urged, "be honest." "You've never been one to put on a polite act," I said, letting out a breath through my nose as my jaw tightened. I was trying hard not to give in to the urge to snap this dull, stupid jerk's neck. But he kept pressing forward. Finally, I shot him a glare in the rearview mirror, my voice low and sharp. "Why the hell would you hang out with someone who bullies your girlfriend?" He blinked once, as if the thought had never even crossed his mind. "Come on, man," he said with a laugh, waving his hand dismissively. "They're just like that with everyone. It's just their nature, nothing personal." My hands clenched tighter around the steering wheel. He simply didn't get it. He hadn't noticed the look on Penny's face every time Rebecca spoke. He hadn't seen how she'd gradually shrink into herself, growing quieter and quieter, as if she were trying to hide herself completely, and he actually thinks this is perfectly normal. Taylor kept talking away, completely oblivious. Well, okay, maybe their remarks were a bit harsh. But once they really get to know Penny, they'll definitely like her. She's just so wonderful. He said it all so casually, as if it were a given, as if the whole world would eventually see Penny the way he did. Maybe they will. But Penny shouldn't have had to fight for basic respect in this way. She shouldn't have had to put up with all this in the first place. I didn't say a single word. I just stared straight ahead at the road, feeling a cold, ugly emotion welling up inside my chest. Because he was right about one thing, she really was wonderful. And yet he was blind to the fact that he didn't even deserve her. We pulled up in front of her house, a small, neat little home, its porch light shining like a tiny beacon in the darkness. I turned off the ignition, the engine rumbled softly, and the headlights cast long shadows across the lane. Taylor shifted behind me and pulled out his phone again. "Hold on a sec," he muttered, his thumb darting rapidly across the screen, "probably arranging another party. scheduling yet another night of feigned concern. I glanced at Penny once more. She was still asleep. Her breathing remained slow and steady, and the fog condensing on the car window formed a soft halo above her head. It wasn't until my chest started to ache that I realized I'd been holding my breath all along. I exhaled slowly, feeling some primal, fractured emotion gnawing at my ribs. For just an instant, just one fleeting moment, I imagined reaching out, unbuckling her seatbelt, gently lifting her into my arms, carrying her inside, tucking her in beneath a warm blanket. Make sure no one ever makes her feel small again. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to yearn for exactly that, only for Taylor to ruin it all. He reached across the seats in a swift, careless motion and shook her shoulder hard. "Penny, baby. Wake up." She jolted awake, blinking rapidly, fumbling frantically for her seatbelt. It took her a full 10 seconds to realize where she was, under the glow of the lights, her cheeks flushed, her gaze dazed and unfocused. I stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that it felt like the only thing holding me firmly in my seat. Just what kind of jerk would wake someone up like that? "Hey, we're home," Taylor said cheerfully, as if he hadn't just rudely yanked her out of the only safe haven she'd had all night. Penny rubbed her eyes, squinting groggily at the light spilling from the porch, then she turned around, and even though she was still half asleep, disoriented, maybe still trembling from being abruptly awakened, she managed a weary little smile. "Thanks for bringing us back," she said softly. I nodded stiffly, unable to utter a single word, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd burst into a fury. She pushed open the car door and stepped out, her backpack slipped off one shoulder, and the porch light illuminated her hair. Taylor picked up his own bag from the ground. Just as he was about to open the door, I spoke in a low, stern voice, "Couldn't you at least carry her inside?" He froze mid-motion, one hand still resting on the doorknob. Slowly, he turned around, his face etched with confusion. Then he laughed, really laughed. "Come on, man," he grinned widely, "she's kind of heavy." The words hit me like a punch straight to the gut. "Sinking? Huh? I bet my 2 kidneys she's not sinking, not even a little bit. Not a chance." My vision blurred for a split second, and anger churned behind my eyelids. He noticed the expression on my face and immediately raised both hands in surrender. "I'm just kidding." Oh my God. Besides, if she woke up in her own bed, she'd probably be totally confused, and absolutely hate it. "I'm doing this out of kindness. You don't have to wait for me tonight, get it?" He winked once, then winked again, before slipping out of the car. I watched as he jogged over to her, casually slung his arm around her shoulder, and saw her give a subtle nod of acceptance. Then I watched them walk together into the house, the front door clicking shut behind them, a heavy, final clang like the gate of a prison slamming closed. I sat there, my breathing rapid, my hands clenched tight on the steering wheel, then loosening again and again. I fought desperately against the urge to rip the steering wheel right off the dashboard. She's not mine. She never was, and she never will be. I've told myself time and again to stay away from her. I put the car in reverse, quickly backing out of the driveway, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. The night swallowed me whole, cold, dark, endless, and I let it consume me, because that was always better than what I really wanted to do.
When I stepped into the house, I was still half asleep. The drive had left my mind muddled, a drowsy haze, like the kind you get after oversleeping, as if reality itself had slowed down by half a beat. Taylor closed the front door behind us, kicked off his shoes, and took my hand, leading me toward the living room. "Come on," he said softly, gently guiding me down onto the sofa. I blinked at him, still caught between wakefulness and sleep. Taylor knelt down and slowly untied the laces of my sneakers, as if he had all the time in the world. He took off one shoe, then the other, and neatly tossed them aside next to the sofa. Then he pulled off my socks, his fingertips lightly tracing along my ankles. I couldn't help but give him a gentle, slightly goofy smile. When it was just the two of us, no football team members around, no Rebecca hovering nearby, no endless parties going on, I loved him so deeply that it felt like my chest might burst with joy. It was just like it used to be, simple, effortless, and beautiful. He looked up at me, wearing that crooked little smile, the kind that used to make my heart race and leave me breathless when we'd first met. "I'm sorry I've put you through all this tonight," he said, cupping my face in both hands. His palms were warm and steady against my cheeks. "But I'm really glad you could make it," he added. "I love having you here with me. Love showing off my girlfriend to everyone," he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead, then my cheek, then my nose, a rapid series of gentle kisses that made me chuckle, even though I was still groggy. I lightly poked him and said, "Stop it, you're ticklish." "That's exactly how it should be," he replied, burying his face in the crook of my neck like a golden retriever, his voice soft and playful. "Your reaction is just too adorable." He pulled back slightly and tilted my chin upward. He kissed me once, softly and lingeringly. Then again, this time with more intensity. I let out a soft sigh against his lips, my fingers curling around the edge of his underwear at his hip. He kissed me once more, this time more urgently, more firmly, and suddenly, it felt as if the ground beneath my feet were tilting. His hand slowly slid along the side of my waist, moving with tender care and precision, leaving goosebumps in its wake. He took off my vest and stared at me. I loved the way he looked at me. He kissed my jawline, my throat, the hollow behind my ear. Unconsciously, I tilted my head back, giving him more space. When his lips lightly brushed against the sensitive spot on my chest, I couldn't help but giggle. He grinned against my skin in response. "Ticklish," he murmured softly, his tone teasing. "Shut up," I whispered, gently tugging on his hair. He chuckled lowly, then climbed onto the bed and kissed me again, deeper, more passionately, until I was gasping for air, until the entire world beyond this bed, beyond this room, beyond him himself, seemed to dissolve into nothingness. I woke up alone in the empty bed, wrapped in a blanket so heavy it felt almost oppressive, tightly secured, as if he were afraid I might sneak away without a trace. For a fleeting moment, I was half asleep, my eyes blinking as I stared at the ceiling, trying hard to recall where I was, what day it was, and why I felt inexplicably happy. Then, suddenly, memories flooded back. Last night, Taylor had his arm around my waist, his deep laughter brushing against my ear, and the way he kissed every inch of my body. It was as if even the slightest closer breath could make me burst into laughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. That beautiful mess, so real and grounded. I rolled over, pulled back the blanket, and noticed a bright pink sticky note stuck to the edge of the bedside table, gently swaying in the breeze that drifted in through the window. 9 a.m. practice. Love you. His handwriting was scribbled so hastily it looked like he could barely hold the pen anymore. Still groggy, I couldn't help but smile. Reaching out, I smoothed the sticky note flat, as if doing so could somehow keep that light, silly, and overwhelmingly joyful feeling right here, just beneath my chest. Taylor is gone. Clearly, training doesn't wait for anyone. For the first time in years, I don't have a single thing I absolutely have to do today. No classes to attend, no rehearsals to worry about, and no dentist appointment, forced on me by my parents, waiting to drag me away. Just tons of free time. You'd think this would excite me, but instead, I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a high diving board, suddenly realizing I can't swim a lick. Still, there's no way I'm going to spend the whole day lying in bed like a soggy croissant. I sit up, rub my face, and it takes me a good while to register. The clothes I'm wearing are only half of what I had on when I fell asleep last night. But hey, no big deal. Thanks, Taylor. I grab the first pair of underwear and leggings I come across and slip them on, then rummage through last night's tank top. After getting dressed up neatly, I headed straight for the dance bar mounted on the far wall of the room. Even if I wasn't undergoing formal training, that didn't mean I could afford to slack off. Slacking off would only lead to a strained hamstring and shatter my dreams. I placed one foot on the bar, bent forward to stretch, and slowly exhaled. It felt amazing. So solid, so reassuring. My body knew these movements better than my mind did. Muscle memory surfaced automatically, yet my thoughts drifted elsewhere. Most often, they wandered to Taylor, the way he'd lie on top of my hair, softly telling silly jokes, the focused intensity with which he'd kiss me, as if he didn't want to go anywhere else in the world. Last night, we'd just been kissing. Well, maybe a little more than that. It was a messy, sweet, languid kiss, punctuated by endless touches that made the whole room seem to spin gently around us. There was no panic, no rush, no clumsy attempts to go further or do more. There were just him and me, and a silent understanding between us that this was enough. I switched legs and bent down a little deeper. 30 minutes later, my muscles still felt faintly warm, my stomach was growling with hunger, and my hair was completely disheveled. I'd just thrown it into a haphazard bun on top of my head. It was time for breakfast. I trudged downstairs, covering my mouth with my sleeve as I yawned, my mind already filled with images of eggs, fluffy pancakes, and maybe even an entire loaf of bread. I pulled open the fridge door. The next second, I let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a cry for help. The fridge was utterly barren, just one lonely slice of processed cheese, a jar of pickles that looked older than I was, and a bottle of almond milk that was definitely plotting something against me. Forget it, I muttered to myself, slamming the refrigerator door shut, as if it had deliberately offended me. Fine. Looks like I'll have to go grocery shopping after all. I shoved my feet haphazardly into my sneakers, grabbed the keys, and headed out the door, dreading another round of stomach rebellion. Luckily, the supermarket was pretty empty, just a few retired folks haggling over apples, and a mom trying to coax her mischievous little kid into eating cereal. I wheeled my cart in and mentally drafted what was probably the most uninspired grocery list ever: bread, eggs, yogurt, and maybe a few token vegetables, just to avoid another health lecture from my parents when they got home. I picked up a loaf of bread, a dozen eggs, a bunch of bananas that looked a bit more vibrant than the others, and a stash of emergency chocolate because, let's face it, that definitely counts as a staple food. Walking toward the middle of the dairy aisle, I was torn between whether to buy that fancy Greek yogurt that would make me feel like I'd finally got life figured out. As I turned around, I nearly bumped my shopping cart into someone else's. "Whoa," a familiar voice said with a laugh. Startled, I looked up, and there he was, Mr. Hayes, standing right there, grinning at me as if I'd somehow brightened his whole day. He was wearing jeans and a slightly wrinkled hoodie, and his shopping cart was already half full of real, adult groceries, potatoes, fresh meat, rather than just frozen waffles. Before I could even say anything, he reached out and gave me a hug that was solid and warm and totally unawkward. "Hey, kid," he said, letting me go and smiling. "Have you been lately?" I shrugged and smiled back. "Pretty good, though I'm just tired, always tired." He smiled and moved the shopping cart to the side of the aisle so we wouldn't block the way. "Any news yet? About the audition?" I shook my head. "Not yet, though I'm supposed to hear something this weekend." He wore a clearly displeased expression, as if the fact that the casting team hadn't gotten back to me immediately was somehow an insult to him. "They'd be the real fools if they didn't pick you," he said with absolute conviction, as though it were an established truth. My cheeks felt faintly warm. It was silly, really, but hearing someone say that without a hint of doubt meant so much to me. He glanced down at my shopping cart and raised an eyebrow. "That's all you're buying?" "Just the essentials." I looked at the pitiful contents of my cart, the bananas, bread, yogurt, and chocolate, and said seriously, "It's a balanced diet." He burst into laughter, a hearty, genuine laugh that was loud enough to draw the attention of several shoppers nearby. Before I could even react, he said, he'd already started grabbing stuff from his own shopping cart and putting them into mine: a can of pasta sauce, a package of frozen vegetables, a box of chicken breasts, and a loaf of garlic bread. "There we go." He clapped his hands together as if he'd just pulled off some incredible feat. "Now that's a proper dinner." I glanced at the growing pile of groceries in the car and blinked a few times. "Mr. Hayes, don't be so formal," he interrupted me before I could finish. "You're practically family." Hearing the word family made my throat tighten ever so slightly, but I quickly suppressed the emotion. "Thanks," I said, my voice carrying far more gratitude than he might have realized. He smiled, a warm, easy smile. "Oh, by the way," he said, as if he'd just remembered something important, "are you free tomorrow night?" I nodded instinctively, only then remembering that I should have first checked the non-existent social schedule. "Great," he said. "Come over for dinner, no refusal allowed." I don't want to bother you, I started to say, but he waved his hand to cut me off. It's not bothering us, it's an invitation, he said with such certainty that I simply couldn't refuse, even though a little hesitation lingered in my heart. I smiled and said, I'd love to come. Thanks. He patted me on the shoulder and pushed the shopping cart toward the checkout counter. See you tomorrow, kid. As I watched his departing back, the cart now brimming with groceries, a strange yet silly warmth gently settled deep within my heart.